Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spill the jams to spill the tea. It's the 99th episode of the show, and this week we're going to be reviewing two new records from two artists. We're going to be talking about the latest entry in the discography of rapper Joey Bada, his album 1999. That's the fucking mixtape 2000, because
+1.
And we're also going to be reviewing the newest album from one of my favorite bands, Imperial Triumphant's new album, Spirit of Ecstasy. And not just that, we got more coming at you this week. We have our record club, which is excitingly on a dual record club of Blur's album 13 and the Gorillaz album Plastic Beach, where we discuss Damon Albarn and co, and it's really good and fun and shit. Oh, exciting news is that we started the National Retrospective. We started off talking with the self-titled National album.
The National Retrospective. That seems like a lot of places to cover.
We also covered on last week's record club, the 100th record club, the Wonder Years. We talked about their album The Greatest Generation and how it's probably one of the best pop punk albums ever. So go check that album out. Go check that little review out. Last week we talked about Black Midi and Lizzo, and now we're here, and so is August. Morgan isn't rated this week. We kicked Morgan off the show, and then we forced August back onto here.
Yeah.
August is joining us to discuss records that we've been listening to recently, and then we may hopefully have Brett on to guest with us for the reviews. Also, something else to look forward to coming up this week. I believe on this coming Friday, we're going to have, or Jake is going to drop a discography ranking of the Cocteau Twins, which is a band that Jake, of course, has talked about a lot on the podcast recently. So I, for one, am getting ready for a week of re-listening to my favorite Cocteau Twins records, and can't wait to, so stick around for that as well. Lots of cool stuff coming. As Jake mentioned, this is the 99th episode of our main show, which means that this time next week, the four of us will be all together discussing, not discussing really any new music, but we are going to be discussing and celebrating 100 episodes of our main show, and that's going to be a really fun special celebration. So stick around for that too. But as is per usual, we're going to kick this episode off by talking about what we have been listening to in the past 7 days, or in the case of August, whatever fucking time frame he feels like. Jake, what have you been listening to?
Okay, very, very good big week for me. Honestly, been looking forward to this for some time. First thing I want to shout out is that I'm getting back into jazz again, and I'm taking an even deeper plunge this time. I've basically gone out of my way to download every canonical jazz album from like the 10 most critically beloved jazz artists of all time. Your Coltrane's, both of your Coltrane's, I guess in this instance, your Pharoah Sanders, your Chick Corea's, your Miles Davis, your Duke Ellingtons, all that kind of shit. Mahavishnu, and I'm going back and listening to some albums I've heard before and some new stuff, mainly new stuff. But I listen to stuff like I know that this podcast is a big fan of the Mahavishnu Orchestra's The Intermounting Flame. I like that album more every time I listen to it. Also, the collaboration record with Mahavishnu's John McLaughlin and Carlos Santana, Love, Devotion, Surrender. That might have my preferred version of A Love Supreme on it, but don't tell anybody. And a bunch of other shit. I've listened to stuff like Miles Davis' album Sorcerer, which is composed of a quartet of really famous musicians, and this particular run of like that album, Nefertiti, I think, like Miles in the Sky, particular records that maybe don't get as much shine as they should, perhaps. That I have been enjoying very, very greatly. I also listened to the band that I guess it's going to be everyone on this podcast. We're all going to take turns getting into an uncool dad rock, jazz rock band. Ryley got into Steely Dan and I guess this is my turn because I'm getting really into Santana. Not a sentence I expected to say, honestly. I just like, I know that Santana is a beloved band and that they have many records that people have loved. And hell, in the past, I listened to Santana's Abraxas last year, really fucking liked that record. Listened to it again and really liked it. But what I did not anticipate discovering is that for as much as I like that album, I've listened to their first 5 records now, and I think that might actually be my least favorite of them so far, which is a terrific record. That is to say, Santana's first initial run of records is so fucking good. Oh my God. The self-titled Santana, 1969, is easily one of my favorite albums of the 60s thus far. It's just really great meat and potatoes jazz rock. I mean, if you like stuff like Steely Dan, this is right up your alley. But this also just like some absolutely fucking terrific piano and sort of organ work on here from one of the band's mainstays. I think it's Greg Ryley. I can't really pronounce his last name, but he's a terrific player on these albums, an essential part of the sound of this band, a really just upbeat and kind of joyous band, one of the most joyous bands I've gotten into in recent memory. And Abraxas is sort of a continuation of their sound. They infuse it with a little bit more jazz proper, a little bit more of a jazz fusion record, but overall their sound is a little bit poppier on that album, a little bit more accessible. But the 2 albums that I really want to mention from them are Santana 3 and Caravanserai, their 4th album. Fuck. Santana 3 is some dope shit. This is one of the most overwhelmingly like happy, colorful, just like this is like right up there with some of my favorite jazz rock albums, with like Frank Zappa's Hot Rats, with Steely Dan's Asia. It is that good. Every single song on here, mwah, perfect. It's just sensational stuff. It's like the pinnacle of what they've been doing up until this point. And then the album after that, Caravanserai, is just like no bones about it. It's like full jazz fusion. It's like they just fully lean into making their bitches brew. It's basically one huge piece of music. It flows seamlessly into itself, and it is so mellow, multifaceted. It gives you the sort of feeling of like traveling in this like Arabian caravan at night, and it's like a party. It's dope as shit. I love it. It manages to showcase a ton of like facets of this band that didn't really get explored before now. And the way they just like, they don't seem to have any like transitional woes on here is just, it's sensational. I loved it. These 2 records, I mean, all 4 of their first 4 records are fantastic. I can't wait to get to the rest of their discography, because by all accounts, they have some other really great heavy hitter records later on down the line. So I'm really excited to listen to more of this band. I'm really getting on with it. And so that is composed of like almost half of my jazz listening this week. And another significant part of my listening that does go along with jazz is I actually have a bit of an apology to make. And that apology is to one of my favorite musicians, that being Omar Rodriguez-Lopez. The reason I want to apologize to this man is because I've often clowned on the fact that he has like 50 solo records, and that, you know, by all accounts, they seem to be lesser works than the Mars Volta and At the Drive-In and all of their more proper stuff. And the thing is that I thought that for stupid reasons, because the only album of his I had listened to was the highest rated one on Sputnik Music, which, like, his entire catalog on that website has like 25 reviews of each record, like not enough data to significantly pool who, like, what of those albums is better than the other at all. So Rate Your Music, by all accounts, is a better metric to judge these records by. But I noticed something. I was like, you know, some of these records he's on, they're under different names. Some of them are under different band names, and some of them are under the Omar Rodriguez-Lopez Quartet, trio, and quintet. And I'm like, does Omar have a jazz fusion band? And yeah, he kind of does. And I am here to report that it's great. Specifically, there are a couple projects of his that really took me back this week. Ones that I wholeheartedly recommend to fans of the Mars Volta, to fans of their music in general. I really want to shout out, first of all, the albums Xenophanes and Solar Gambling, both of which were put out in 2009, both of which sound very much Bedlam and Goliath era Mars Volta. And the thing is that the appeal of these is that they're very concise, and they're not mixed like the Bedlam and Goliath. They're mixed like, well, Amputecture, I would say. And that they're like 30-minute long records, and they're fusing everything, but into a jazz-like structure. And fuck me, specifically Xenophanes is an album I know that a lot of Mars Volta fans, like a lot of the ones on Reddit, I know they say they consider Xenophanes to be up there with like the canon of the record. And frankly, I like that album about as much as I like something like Octahedron, which is a pretty great deal. I would highly recommend it. I would highly recommend Solar Gambling. That one's a little less consistent by my measure, but still very much worth listening to. I also listened to another one of the quartets, Sepulcros del Miel, which is kind of the prototypical, like exactly what you would expect an Omar Rodriguez-Lopez solo album to be like, and that it is the least significant thing I think I've listened to from him. It just at points feels like you're listening to Mars Volta soup, which I mean, I get something out of that, but it's also just kind of disorganized, and it doesn't really have any direction that I find compelling about his other projects. But by all means, go check out those other albums. They're great. But the one I want to shout out the most, my favorite one, is under the name of El Grupo Nuevo de Omar Rodriguez-Lopez.
Oh,
And
yeah, I've heard of
interesting
this
lineup
name.
here. Interesting lineup, because we have not only Omar and Cedric on here, but on the drums, we have Zach fucking Hill of Death Grips. And this album fucking kicks ass, man. This album is great. Like, just 36 minutes of insane post-hardcore jazz fusion shit. It's far away enough from the Mars Volta to feel like its own thing, but close enough so that anyone who enjoys that will totally enjoy this as well. And like, this shit is so wild sounding. And as you would expect for a project for Zach Hill to be on, the rhythm section on this shit is insane. It is really fucking heavy. Like, prog metal levels of heavy sometimes, and it's great. And the song titles on here are fucking terrific. There's songs like They're Coming to Get You, Barbara, Puny Humans, Shake is for 8th graders, Paper Cuts, and the last song, 23-second long, Fuck Your Mouth.
Hell yeah.
So that'll give you the idea of the level of irreverence perhaps here. Another thing totally separate from what I just mentioned that I want to shout out is that Billie Eilish came out with a new EP recently, a surprise drop of 2 songs that are on an EP called Guitar Songs. And I gotta say, I really hope her next album sounds like this. I know it's probably not, and there's some topical lyrics on here that make me think that this is probably a side project that she's just sort of doing interstitially, but it's got Phineas on production again. And basically, if I can sell this to people, Billie Eilish does boy genius songs. There you go. Both of which are pretty fucking great, honestly. I think the first song on the EP is called TV, and that's very Lucy Dacus, Phoebe Bridgers, like both in lyricism and instrumentation, but it also has that kind of Phineas polish on it that makes it really nice to listen to. And Billie is being a little bit more dynamic with her voice now, which very, very happy to see that Happier Than Ever seemed to have yielded that. And so I think that TV is a great song. It's sort of kind of hit a little bit closer to home than I expected, considering the subject material of being romantically interested in someone who is not really that interested in caring all that much about you. But it's great stuff. But the second song on here is The 30th. And I think this might be Billie Eilish's best song. Probably my favorite of hers. It's her recounting her friend getting in a car accident and her going to visit her in the aftermath in the hospital. And it does definitely have that sort of indie rock, sad girl sort of sound to it. But with the subject material, and especially with the vocal melodies and the way that Billie's voice is mixed and the way that it sounds like Peter Silberman. This song sounds like something that would come off of Hospice. Like, I was really, really reminded by that. Like, the vocal melodies, like, Ryley, if you listen to this second song and tell me that immediately after this, you can't hear Peter Silberman singing these very, very specific vocal melodies, because it sounds like Kettering is basically what I would compare it to. And this is a terrific fucking song. It's probably one of my favorite songs of the year. In fact, it's got a great climax at the end that I think is just sensational. And I know it's quite unlikely that Billie will make like an indie rock folky pivot, but God, it would be amazing if she did, because if these two songs are any indication, she's great at it. And I guess the last thing I will mention here is obviously, you know, going through a bunch of like jazz and stuff, but like right before I got on my jazz kick, I was on a bigger sort of heavy music kick because of Imperial Triumphant. And thankfully, out of the blue, as he often does, PokeGem, our friend, Twitter mutual friend of the podcast, swoops into our group chat every so often to recommend an album that none of us have heard of and that usually kicks fucking ass. And boy, let me tell you, recommended Mirror in Darkness by Serpent Column. And I know Ryley made fun of this for having
it is definitely very metal AI generated band name and album title, but I respect that.
Very true. Very true. It sounds quite generic, and probably if I didn't have a recommendation from a friend, I probably would have put it in the background. But let me just say this much. This album made me download this band's all three of their records and all three of their EPs, because this shit is goddamn amazing. If I can sell it in any way, imagine if the Dillinger Escape Plan kept Dimitri Menakakis from the first album, kept making records, and then eventually made a black metal album. That's Mirror in Darkness, and it is nasty. This is a vicious mathcore black metal infused record that is 40 minutes of absolute pain. And at some point, I just relented, accepted the beatdown, and it is one of the best albums I've heard this year. My God, not a weak track on here. And from what I can tell, their two other records and their EPs are pretty good too. So I need to check out their stuff as well. But by all means, I may have found a new up-and-coming band to really look out for, just because I'm really interested as to what these guys can do with this very specific, interesting, heavy, and unique sound. So, and hell, if you are here for the Imperial Triumphant review this week, I would recommend them on account of they don't have the jazz part of Imperial Triumphant, obviously, but I feel like the mathiness will still be a draw of similar sort of sensibilities. If you like the new album especially, you'll probably really like this.
All right. Well, August, what have you been listening to recently that you want to shout out here today on our episode?
First off, we're gonna talk about the planet Earth. Earth, the band. Earth, the band, headed by
Little Dicky.
Dylan Carlson, notably the man who gave Kurt Cobain the shotgun he killed himself with.
Whoa, really?
So, yes, really. And that's relevant because I'm going to recommend to you the first album they made after their hiatus called Hex or Printing in the Infernal Method. Now, this is a kind of a concept album based off of Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And because all of the songs, yeah, because all of the song titles like The Dire and Ever Circling Wolves, Tethered to the Pole Star are all lines lifted directly from that book. And this is an Americana drone album that is like 45 minutes long of just the most like wretched apocalyptic shit. It's awesome and you should listen to it.
I like that the top review just says Ennio Morricone.
That's right, because
just all I need.
That's exactly it. It's cool and you should listen to it, and if you don't, you're a fuck. That's my review. I mean, I can say he plays the guitar on the 4th, but then he goes to the 7th instead of the 6th. Holy shit. Like I can make all those comments. You get the point. Just listen to it. A more visceral experience I had was listening to Andrew W.K's Close Calls with Brick Walls. This is the best Andrew W.K album. Let no one tell you otherwise, because this is the best mix of like insane, crazy hard rock he's made, mixed in with weirdo fucking experimental out there songs. Like for the hard rock side, you've got like stuff like Not Going to Bed, which is a song about not going to bed, and it's awesome. And for the experimental side, you've got tracks like Pushing Drugs, and like these lyrics are fucking awesome. A hotel rings at the end of the world. Whatever happened to the telephone girl? And was it really just a one-shot deal? If you don't answer the call, then the call is not real. and that's hey, not even.
I'll drink to that, bro.
No, that's not even the best one. You really put me in a hardcore funk. One man's treasure is another man's junk, and one man's yard is another man's dump. I'll push you off the roof if you're too afraid to jump.
That's hard as hell. Again,
no, this whole song is going while it sounds like he's talking through like a McDonald's drive-through box, and it's fucking awesome.
Tell you what, once again, Rate Your Music comes through to me because top review is all I need to know. Like listening to 3 ACD songs at the same time while being set on fire.
Yeah.
I'm downloading this right now.
Okay, and here's the other thing. This album has his most emotional gut-punching songs on it, period. Like, there are some genuinely really beautiful moments on here, like especially in the back third, like Don't Call Me Andy and The Moving Room, which are two just really inspiring, kind of sad but powerful, like heavy songs. This is insane. And I would have like from just going from the raucous party anthems of I Get Wet, this album feels like him evolving in the best ways possible. And it's like this transcends being just a good album if you think you're in the bag for it. I think this is just an amazing album. I have it at an 8 now. I'm really teetering on a 9. It's fucking God. Christ, this is great. Third thing, I'll talk about a bit of a discography I went through. I mean,
yeah.
every every end, you know, it has a start. Every shit has a fart. And I listened to the shit that little band called Editors have made. Now, let me be clear. I love the first Editors album, not like love. I think it's a really good kind of poppy, punky, kind of U2, Interpolish, sort of middle ground of those two groups. I think that album's really fun. It's like a great sugar rush of just exciting, blood pumping songs. Second
Agreed.
album, I don't like it as much. I think the first two tracks on there are really great, but
Smokers Outside the Hospital Doors, I think, is my favorite Editor's song. The opener on that record.
Yeah, no,
I love that
kind of
song
like
so much.
An End Has a Start a little more, the title
Fair
track, but look, that's also in probably my top 10 Editors songs, so I'm not hating at all.
Escape the Nest is great as well. An End Has a Start is a very uneven record, but I very much like have a fondness for it. And
Yeah.
I have a weird relationship with this band. I'll let you finish talking about them first and then get into it. But
Yeah,
I think you're going to speak to a few of the points I'm going to bring up anyway.
so I'm kind of just going to do a brief run through their albums, because in this light on this evening, they kind of do a more synthy, dancey almost direction. They're taking from more of,
It's like they're trying to make a Depeche Mode album with that.
yeah,
one.
that's, and what I kind of realized is that this band has a very similar career trajectory to a band we all love called Block Party, but it's like what the public perception of Block Party is, in that they got really shit, but that's actually what happens to Editors. All right, so let me lay it down. First two albums, you know, we've got the first record. They're kind of big magnum opus, their best thing they've ever made, undisputably. Second album, you know, it's kind of similar to the first album, maybe some more electronic elements. Then they go full on headboard with the electronic stuff, and then you know, members leave, stuff happens, and they make just the most bland bullshit, like stripped back, toothless, gutless, spineless, gay rock album ever with The Weight,
of Your Love.
Fucking, how about The Weight of My Fucking Dick in Your Mouth? I hate, this is my least favorite Editors album. It's
cheesy as hell. It is exactly as cheesy as you would expect a record called The Weight of Your Love to be.
Like, they basically become like a shitty AOR group. Like, fucking Styx could make this album, and it would be right at home in their catalog. It's
I kind of like Sugar is my one little take there, but yes, a lot of the record is very bland.
Like the title track, I think it's right from the first song, The Weight, where you're just like, oh, this is garbage, because it's the most like forlorn, cheesy kind of shit. And
it has this terrible album cover of like a rose, a white rose that's being like smothered in like fog and like dirt and stuff, and it's just like, come on, guys, get with the program.
And then they've got In Dream, not In Dreams, in a singular dream, because Editors ran out of the money to afford multiple. This album, it's an improvement, but I find it kind of completely immemorable, really. There's some okay moments on here, like I think Marching Orders is not half
song.
bad.
I love that song. I also really like the opening track, No Harm, as well, which is restrained for this band. I'll just say off the bat, I won't get into it. It's your segment. I have a fondness for this album that is like, I know it's not very good, and there are some songs on it that I do not like at all, like Salvation, Forgiveness, The Law. Fucking some bad songs on here.
Particularly, that song made me laugh my ass off. That was hilarious.
I will say I've got a playlist of like songs that I really like from albums that I don't really like. And No Harm, Ocean of Night, and Marching Orders are on that playlist.
Yeah, Ocean Night. That's another pretty. That song has a really nice. I kind of like the synth passages in that. Like tasteful. It's tasteful, and you know, then there's Violence, which I think is somehow an even more forgettable album.
While being a total fucking disaster musically to listen to. Like
it's so aggressively like it feels like they were making the album while in the studio. I can't describe how just noxiously unfocused and just odd this all feels.
Songs like Magazine and Hallelujah are like, they're the most memorable moments on the record because they're the songs that are the most kind of like, that just jump out at you the most.
Yeah.
And they're just garish as all hell. They're just,
it's
just like this record was produced by Blank Mass. And that's worth noting because you can sense the influence of like his electronic sounds that don't marry very well to what editors want to do here, admittedly. But it's also worth noting because he's officially joined the band now.
Yes.
Actually, their upcoming album, which is coming out very soon, is called EBM.
EBM, Editors Blank Mass.
But also like a pun on EDM as well,
yes,
presumably.
I would assume that's what they're, you know what? I'm going to listen to it. I'm genuinely very excited for it because it's going to be either a gigantic disaster or like just whatever.
I have hopes that I'll enjoy it more than Violence, if only because every song except for one is longer than 5 minutes. And there are multiple that are like 7 minutes and up. So it's going to be like, hopefully that will mean that we're going to get some proper like actual jams, like songs that actually feel like they're invested in being something musically, as opposed to half of Violence, which is just kind of like just a shrug. Look, I'm with you, August. I'm legitimately excited for this album. I'm gonna listen to it on day one.
Look, I mean, if nothing else, we'll have to talk about it in an opening segment.
For sure.
I've never been more excited for you two to talk about an album from a band I've never listened to.
I'd say try the first album, if nothing else.
It's really solid post-punk revival. It's super derivative post-punk revival, but it is still, regardless, like it has some really strong hooks. Yeah, the back room is like, it's a good album.
My thing is, I can recognize the derivativeness, but I also don't give a shit because I am having fun while listening to it, and I think editors have enough of their own personality on that album that it feels distinct enough to me. Like their songwriting in particular is, at least on some of the early songs, quite emblematic of them, which is also an element that kind of fades away with time, but so be it.
I will say that for as much as I consider this band a bit of a guilty pleasure, it is probably worth saying that lead vocalist Tom Smith has maybe one of the most pretentious and annoying voices of any band in the 2000s. Like he has this kind of like nasal urgency to the way he sings. It actually works really well for the first couple of records.
Yeah.
Because it's very much like, God, they're aping Interpol so hard on those first two albums. Like he's trying to do the same sort of thing that Paul Banks does, where he has the same kind of like nasal urgency. But then you get to the later records, like Weight of Your Love and In Dream and stuff, and he's doing these like tender love ballads, and it sounds like fucking a Muppet is singing.
The love ballads, the later like love balladry is so tacky. And I mean, it doesn't help that it's written with all the eloquence of like a jock writing poetry, like I love it when you suck my dick. My dick comes a lot of jizz.
That would get points from me. Like the writing's on the wall by the time you get to I knew that I was gonna like have a difficult relationship with this band when I got to their second album and I got to the song Weight of the World, which like after the first two songs on that record, which are great, you get this incredibly sappy,
this just horrible song.
Every little piece of your heart.
I think my favorite comment about them that I saw in Rate Your Music was that they were like Nickelback for people who read Kurt Vonnegut. That stuck with me so much, and it's so fucking funny.
That's the best way I've ever heard editors describe.
God.
Truly a band with absolutely zero mileage that I nevertheless have heard all of their albums multiple times.
Every time you two talk about this band, you're just like, yeah, I kind of like their first album, and then just an onslaught of shit that is just like, yeah, they're fucking unlistenable. It's garbage. It's terrible. I want to kill myself.
No, I think just for the song Munich alone, I would have a permanent love-hate relationship with this band. But there's also like 5 other songs on there that are like just as good as Munich.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
agree.
like, yeah.
I just find it really funny that you love that album and you cannot at all get on board with Interpol. Like, it's just so funny to me that there's a dissonance there.
It's this weird combination of like the U2-y like riffage and effects with the weird nasally shit that's like, I don't know, it's like 2 things I hate coming together for something that's just like absolutely perfect for me. And I don't get it, but I'm fucking here for it.
I noticed as well that you listened to some later era Linkin Park records too.
Yes,
I
did.
If you're going to comment on those.
I will actually, just because what I can say about later era Linkin Park is that, and what I'm referring to is we're going Minutes to Midnight to Living Things, and that's with 1,000 Suns in the middle. So Minute to Midnight was an album I was hoping a lot to enjoy because it has the song What I've Done, which I've heard 10,000 times because of watching Transformers 10,000 times.
Damn right.
So I was hyped for this record properly. And I guess the thing is, to explain my relationship with Linkin Park is unlike everyone else here, my favorite Linkin Park album is Hybrid Theory, because for me, I really think that what makes Linkin Park is their dedication to that rap metal, rap rock kind of fusion, like a sincere dedication to fusing those things in a way that really is only matched and beaten by Rage Against the Machine. And to just have that is something that's really cool to me. And, you know, Meteora, I like a lot too, but the way I think is that Meteora's best songs are the more pop influenced ones, and Hybrid Theory's best songs are the more rap and rock metal songs. So that's why I'm kind of Hybrid Theories in my bag. And this album, and you know, Minutes to Midnight takes a lot more of the pop influence and kind of smothers the rock and rap stuff, and it doesn't sit particularly well with me. And then 1,000 Suns is the biggest mess ever. It's
God, it is.
This is insane because like the best song on here is Waiting for the End. And this song is a disaster. Let me just, so it opens with like fucking reggae drums and then goes into like this hard rock and rap passage, and then the reggae drums kick back in, and they're making like weird decisions like this throughout the entire album, and it is ludicrous. It's so funny. You have to listen to it.
I'll just say off the bat, I haven't heard this album. I love Waiting for the Sun. I absolutely adore that song. to the absolute, like, despite my waiting for the end, waiting for the sun.
Yeah. Waiting for the sun.
Whatever it is called. I haven't heard it in years, but I really like that song.
No, look, I enjoy it too. I'm just saying it is sonically a disaster.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right.
Album is so I agree. Like, I listened to that a long time ago, August, but I still remember how just visceral the electronic elements of that album are. Just like it's kind of mind-boggling. It feels borderline experimental.
It's got like an album cover that looks like an off-cut fucking Dead Mouse album cover.
You know what it looks like? It looks like Greg Heffley with inverted colors going like, "I'm a fire in my laser." Blah. That's
that entire thing you just said. That is the I have never felt like I was in 2009 more than just now.
And that was intentional, of course, because the album was released in 2010. So we have our timely references. And Living Things, they have some more electric stuff, but they also kind of, I feel they kind of measure it with a bit of the more rock and rap metal stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's a better balance. It's a little bland in places, but it's, for this band, one of their better releases up to this point. And that's kind of my Linkin Park journey. So we're almost to it, the big one. But TobyMac has a new album coming out. Of course, I'm going to listen to it. And it has a Sheryl Crow feature on it. So, I figured I should get prepped for this Sheryl Crow feature. So I went to a Sheryl Crow concert. I saw her live, and for her age, I'd say she actually has maintained her voice pretty well. Like, listening to her performing live, a lot of her iconic songs, which is, most of what the set list was going to be, as everyone knew. And I'm sorry, this bit is so fucking good.
Did you really go and see a
Yes,
Sheryl
I
Crow?
really did. Do you want to see a picture?
What an incredible level of commitment to the TobyMac bit to go. She has a feature, and so you go and see her live.
Let me show you my pictures.
I admire the dedication so much. I can't believe I forgot to even mention this, but I love that, like, subliminally, you and I got on our mom rock shit because you went to a Sheryl Crow concert and I listened to the album Fly by formerly the Dixie Chicks, now called the Chicks. So we've had at least one chick.
Yeah, but here's Sheryl Crow. This is her live. And one sec, I've got a photo of my here's a photo of my dad taking a photo of Sheryl Crow. But no, she's maintained her voice pretty well. It was a fun time. I enjoyed it enough. But without further ado, we got to get talking about renovating Arrow, Diverse City, the remix album of Welcome to Diverse City, currently my favorite TobyMac album. And this is the remix. This is the slam. This is the one. Like it ain't been done. So the thing is, I'd say the first 5 remixes on here are actually pretty good. Like, they're actually okay. They're not even half bad remixes. Like, they sound distinct enough from the original song that I could choose it as a particular flavor. I particularly liked the Slam D Dub remix and the Diverse City Club a Dub remix, and also the Burn For You shortwave radio mix. Those were all pretty good remixes. I mean, look, you're never not going to make "'cause this freak show's leaving the ground" not a funny, awesome line, and it's so good. And then there's the Burn For You remix, the Cat Paw remix. It's like borderline experimental hip hop for like the last 3 minutes of the track, because it just does this like crazy wall of sound thing that TobyMac's like reverbed, chopped up vocals are rapping over, and it's insane. This man has never failed me. Most of the remixes, like especially on the second half, like the Gone remix, the Gone Long Gone remix is pretty lame.
You're killing me, dude.
And the Catch a Fire White Rabbit mix is that's just an okay one. Actually, probably the worst remix is the Atmosphere Ambiente remix.
Oh.
And yes, it is spelled Ambiente, Ambiente mix. What the fuck is an Ambiente, first off? Is that like a Pokemon? He's like a ghost fire type. And he's got the move Atmosphere. He's bloody Charizard. He's gonna eat your ass. But yeah, this remix album, not amazing, but it was amazing.
Okay, so I'm only going to talk about one artist in my segment this week. And the reason for that is because I'm going to talk about 3 albums from this artist, because it's been a while since I have been on my best behavior and following the instructions of Jake as assigned to me in the quiz episode, listening to the discography of Muse. I haven't actually talked about them in one of these segments for a few weeks now, so I'm making up for lost time. And so I listened to their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th albums, generally the biggest and most well-known Muse records, Origin of Symmetry, Absolution, and Black Holes and Revelations. And I'm going to deliver the definitive take on each of these 3 records. And if you don't agree with me, you're wrong.
I love the confidence.
Origin of Symmetry is... It's so overrated, dude. It is not that good.
Ooh.
It has some good songs. Don't get me wrong. Newborn is a good start. Bliss is strong. Hyper Music has some nice energy to it. Plug In Baby, definitely an enduring Muse single for good reason. And that's it. Space Dementia. What are we doing, guys? This is just... It's very... A lot of this record doesn't hold up, and I feel as though the positive reception or the way in which this record is regarded is very much a rose-tinted glasses thing. Now, look, I came in really harsh when I talked about Showbiz, their debut, which I don't like. I'm not trying to imply that if you like any of these records, you're stupid or whatever. I understand the appeal of a record like Origin of Symmetry, and I do like some of the songs. But by the time you get to the second half of this thing, woof. I won't say it sounds bad, but I don't think it sounds all that great from a production standpoint. Especially
remix version.
I've listened to both versions, and I actually think the remix version is somewhat of an improvement just because it has a little bit more color. It still doesn't really do much for me. But once you get to micro cuts and onwards, I'm checked out. Screenager, come on, guys. Dark Shines, these are perfectly mediocre Muse songs. Like, I feel similarly about those songs as I do about the deep cuts on Showbiz. And this is all to say nothing of the cover of Nina Simone's Feeling Good, which was actually originally written by Leslie Brucus and Anthony Newley for Nina. And what tells you really all you need to know about how I feel about this cover and what it says, the choice to cover this song, is that from what I can gather, maybe someone will correct me on this, but neither Nina, Leslie, nor Anthony are credited for this song in the liner notes for this album. It is all songs by Matthew Bellamy. And Feeling Good is like the height of Matthew Bellamy's unbearable egotism. It's a terrible cover for starters. It is the most it takes a song that has a lot of pizzazz and flair and color to it and turns it into the most overwrought, just plodding, boring, and just completely over dramatized, sappy version of itself. It is gentrified blues bullshit, and I hate it with a fiery passion. I cannot stand any second of this cover. It is utterly awful. Look, if I am coming across as particularly harsh here, know that what I am trying to do here is not tear down Muse fans, but simply own my feelings about Muse without insulting people's intelligence by pretending that I like any of these records more than I do. That said, Absolution is an improvement on Origin of Symmetry. For starters, it's a more consistent record. It has less of the wild variations in quality that Origin of Symmetry has. It's slightly more focused conceptually, and it is also front-loaded as hell. I'm not going to lie. This is...
I like the back half of Absolution more than the front half.
Fair enough. This was a really painful experience revisiting this one because I did not want my feelings on this to fall in the way that my feelings of Origin of Symmetry did. And yet it's fine. I like the singles a lot. Time is Running Out, great. Stockholm Syndrome, one of their best songs. Hysteria, so good. I even like Falling Away With You, which is one of the more sort of portentous deep cut songs on here. I enjoy that to a certain extent as well. But when you hit Blackout onwards, it's, again, there's nothing as offensive on the back half of this as like Screenagers or the Feeling Good cover on Origin of Symmetry, but it just washes over me. Endlessly, Ruled by Secrecy, Blackout, as I already mentioned, the small print, sure. Functional Muse songs. Thoughts of a Dying Atheist, it's a little bit better than a song called Thoughts of a Dying Atheist might set you up to experience, but it's still like
I think that's a pretty good ass song, honestly.
I don't want to die. Like, whatever, dude. I'm not able to get on the wavelength of Matt Bellamy here, and I've made my peace with that. All of this is to say, and I feel quite comfortable being quite candid on those two records, because I think Black Holes and Revelations is the best Muse album, and I think it's the best Muse album by some margin. Like, this is the only Muse album, unless I have some dramatic change in opinion on any of their later records, which who knows.
If you end up liking fucking Drones more than this album,
not going to happen. What I will say is, for all of the shit I've flung at aspects of those first three records, Black Holes and Revelations is an album that I front to back really enjoy. Like, it has a couple of weaker moments, but they are not so distinct from the rest of the record that I'm really put off by them, nor are they as tragic in execution as some of the poorer moments in the previous records. It's a more concise album. It has most of their best songs on it. I'm just going to be straight up. And it is basically this band recognizing their strengths, leaning into them, and for the only time in their career, in my opinion, remembering to have fun with some regularity and consistency. This album is just awesome. I'm not even going to lie. Like, for as much as my opinions of the previous two records have kind of fallen a bit, with equal measure has my fondness for and appreciation for Black Holes and Revelations gone up. I mean, it definitely benefits from the fact that it is a very concise, basically, it's 11 tracks, but it's basically just 10 songs. Really concise record that basically trims most of the fat. I could do without Soldier's Poem or Hoodoo, but I don't hate them. Basically everything else I really like. And the first four songs on this record, I unequivocally love. Like Starlight, Supermassive Black Hole, and Map of the Problematique in particular is the best sequence of music on any Muse record. This is Muse realizing their stadium rock ambitions, matching that with production that actually does them justice and makes the music feel genuinely huge. Yeah, leaning into that hard riffy sort of thing that they are very prone to doing, but actually giving that some spunk and some genuine sense of energy and charisma. I think Supermassive Black Hole is their best song because it is just so completely just fucking fun and sick, and the falsetto that Matt leans into here is daring, but he pulls it off. It's a riotous song. I really like Starlight. That song has really held up for me over the years. The back half, I think, has some great deep cuts that really hold up. Assassin is an excellent song. City of Delusion, one of the most underrated Muse songs. And, of course, Knights of Sidonia.
Hell yeah.
The Guitar Hero anthem of Guitar Hero anthems.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a fun song.
Every bit as good as you remember it being. This is their Bohemian Rhapsody, their Paranoid Android, whatever you want to call it. It holds up. It's an awesome song. I unequivocally love it. And shout out to the bonus track, Glorious. The thing about Absolution and Black Holes and Revelations, both my two favorite Muse records, hot take, is that for some reason, the bonus track on both of them is like there's no good reason for why this isn't on the album proper. Like Fury, it would, if it were on Absolution, would absolutely be top 3. Great song. And Glorious, if it were on Black Holes and Revelation, instead of say like Exopolitics, which is decent enough musically, but also has some of Matt's most like, oh, they're putting fluoride in the water to make your brain lyrics.
Government's trying to control your mind, man.
Take that shit out and put Glorious in, and I would be very inclined to give this the full bump to the 8 out of 10. As it stands, it's a really strong 7 with a basically impeccable first half.
I love that I have essentially like swapped. Like I have punished you with this discography so much more than I punished August with TobyMac's.
Look, so
it's happened accidentally.
I have now made my feelings clear on the big canonical Muse releases. So shit on me all you want for my hot takes on Origin of Cimmerian Showbiz and Absolution. I am going to come to bat for Black Holes and Revelation any day of the week. I think this is one of the great stadium rock records of the modern era. I think that it set a template that so many bands like fucking Biffy Clyro and whoever you can name that have tried to do this big anthemic thing have never been able to capture. The songs here just hold up. And I listened to this a bunch this week, and I'm so glad that I don't dislike this at all, because I didn't want to have to be the sluggish, contrarian shitting on all the big Muse staples. Yeah, I
just
love
2
this
out of the
album.
3,
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna get to, I think next week I might talk about I might just kind of group the next few Muse records into one segment. I'm actually really looking forward to revisiting The Resistance and The Second Law, because those are records that are full of like incredibly garish and just utterly terrible aesthetic decisions that I think are going to be really fun to talk about. So yeah, stick around for that. I'm gonna probably have a few hot takes on certain songs that I do like on those records. All I will say is I have a complicated relationship with the music of Muse. I don't care for a lot of their most canonical stuff, and I find the utterly just terrible sense of aesthetic decision making on some of their later work to be, at the very least, fascinating. So I'm going to talk a lot about that as we go on. And of course, I cannot wait for the release of their upcoming record, Will of the People. I have imbibed, ingested, I have put the singles for that album into my bloodstream, and it's like August with Editors, where I'm just like, just give it to me, just give me the sauce.
Give me that sweet mid, baby.
I cannot wait. I cannot fucking wait. And I want everyone at home to know who likes Muse, I'm not coming at any of these records from the perspective of wanting to hate them or of wishing anything negative on Muse. I want to like Muse at every turn, and there are moments when I really see the vision. I do, and I treasure those moments, and I have nothing but respect for a band. Like I said with
no such moments from here on out.
I said this with Gorillaz and our record club, which is going up in a couple of days' time, where it's like, even when I don't get on board with that band, there are moments when they're doing shit that's so garish and aesthetically tasteless that I have to kind of respect the sheer commitment to it. And that is the case. I think a lot of Gorillaz music tends to be better than a lot of Muse's later music, but I respect a lot of Muse's later music in the same way. And so if you're a Muse fan, stick around for my segments on those later records, because I think you might be less disappointed by how they turn out than you might expect. But save that for when the time comes. This has been my latest segment on Muse. I am in the throes of this discography dive, and I am having the time of my life. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move in to our first review of the day, which is, of course, Imperial Triumphant's new album, Spirit of Ecstasy. So, Imperial Triumphant are a New York-based extreme metal band, black metal avant jazz band, They've developed their sound with some level of fluidity over their recent records, Vile Luxury, 2020's Alphaville, which Jake shouted out as one of his favorite records of that year, into this new record, Spirit of Ecstasy, which is really amping up the jazz aspect of the jazz black metal sound. Jake, why don't you introduce us to this band, talk a little bit about what they are, what they sound like, and what this new record represents for them, and what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I've talked about them a couple of times in my What We've Been Listening To segments, but Imperial Triumphant were a band that came out with their debut record, Abominamentum, in 2012, where they blended a kind of black metal, avant metal, and kind of elements of tech death and dissonant death metal, but were very much on the atmospheric side of things. And then they sort of progressed from there. With Abyssal Gods, they got a lot heavier, a lot darker, and a lot more ambitious. The tech death is a little bit more pronounced on that one, and the atmosphere is thicker, it's darker. And with Vile Luxury, you sort of see the pronounced elements of jazz in their sound that is added to, like, it's not like a black metal album that sometimes has jazz tracks. It's really more incorporation of jazz instruments to sort of add to the dissonant qualities of the dissonant black metal. And then that quality in Vile Luxury, I think, was heavily amplified on 2020's Alphaville, which was one of my favorite albums of that year, and in my estimation, a perfect record for the band. One of my favorites of all time, pretty much, just because I love how consistent, conceptual, there's sort of an overarching theme that this band deals in that's very almost metropolitan in how it tackles ideas of luxuries, capitalism, overindulgence, and it gets very conceptual on Alphaville, where it takes that element and kind of turns it up to 11 and sort of synergizes the extreme sound, which takes the sort of jazziness too, that it blends everything and makes everything uglier and makes it hit harder. So I think my expectation with Spirit of Ecstasy is that I just wanted them to take their sound even further. I wanted them to be weirder, wilder, to somehow push and go further. And to my everlasting shock, I actually think that they did somehow. Because, I mean, look, I love this band. They're one of my favorite current working metal acts, but I didn't necessarily, like, once you hit a peak like Alphaville, I just don't necessarily expect you to be able to deliver immediately another great comparable work, because I feel like that's an unfair expectation to hold. But Imperial Triumphant have risen to the occasion and delivered a work that I think is in basically every way comparable, because God bless, every song on this record is a motherfucking journey. Like,
for sure.
Okay, get out of the way. First and foremost is that the single Mercurius Gilded, as we teased in a previous segment a couple of weeks ago, features Kenny G, because his son Max Gorlick is a member of this band. And it's funny to me that, like, his incorporation is certainly felt, as the saxophone section of Mercurius Gilded are definitely the highlights of one of the highlights on this record. But if you didn't tell me that Kenny G was the one doing that, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't, because it is so in keeping with the absolute ballista of belligerent buffoonery. I think what's really telling about this band, their goals, and their sound is the fact that the producer of this record and of, I think, the previous record, I don't know how many of their other albums, but at least like most of them, is the same producer that worked with fucking Mr. Bungle, which I feel like that has been more pronounced, and just like the sort of whiplash of genres that they've been sort of getting more and more bold with on each record. And that sort of sense of whiplash is deployed on this album with utter fearlessness on every single track here. I think that the opener Chump Change is maybe the most purely like dissonant tech death song on here. That's just really, it's substantial, meat and potatoes, heavy as
super blackened as well. Like, in terms
yeah.
of production style, like you have this relatively wild, dissonant death metal leaning compositions, but you also have this production style that is like slathers it in like this kind of blackened, doomy cloud of just intense distortion stuff. Like it's a really well produced record, a really resonant sounding record, but it has a lot of oppression and oppressiveness built into the way that it's mixed.
And the cool thing about it is that Chump Change is a great song, but it almost lures you into a false sense of security of just being like, yeah, it's dissonant, it's brutal, it's heavy. But if you love tech death and dissonant death metal, if you like Ryley and I, and you're listening to a lot of gore guts and shit, it hits that specific little dopamine gland, but it's familiar. You've definitely heard something like this before. So then Metro Vertigo happens, and it's like, whoa, guys. I need y'all to take a time out for a second.
For starters, you've got Trace Bruance on this record contributing guitar from Mr. Bungle, and you have an obvious reference to a Mr. Bungle song, Retro Vertigo, with the title of this track. Definitely some extra levels of theatrics that the band lean into here. I feel like with Alphaville, when I listened to that in 2020, that was a record that so overwhelmed me with its sheer like intense cacophonous maximalism that I didn't really know what to make of this band. And it was very difficult for me to even feel like I could develop an opinion on what they were doing. I think I understand them a little bit better this time round. And I also think as well that I like this record slightly more. It's not that I think that it's better per se, but it's just slightly more attuned to what I find musically interesting. They just kind of shift and adopt a little bit more of that kind of jazzy influenced personality that I think gives you a little bit more to anchor you into some of these songs, and also just gives the record a slightly more varied palette. Not that those influences were absent on Alphaville, but they're just more pronounced here. And the thing that I would say about Imperial Triumphant is that their whole shtick, from what I can gather, is like, it's difficult to describe what they do thematically without making it sound kind of rote, but it's kind of this ironic sort of tribute to the violent excesses of capitalism, right? This kind of urban hellscape sort of music that is essentially the intent, I think, is to make you feel as sensorially overwhelmed by the record as, the experience of living in a society of total indulgence is from the perspective of this band. They're a New York band, super like, you can sense that fiery city energy coming through in what they do. They have this, again, super conceptual bent. You have lots of songs that kind of speak to this grand kind of pornographic opulence of excess and decay in this urban landscape. I was actually reminded, and I think this is just like more of a comment on like our podcast and the different records that we talk about than an actual like tangible comparison, but thematically and spiritually I was reminded a little bit of the most recent Deer Hunter album, Anti-My, that we talked about, where it has that same sort of energy and idea about like kind of being sort of socially deconstructive and trying to sonically communicate like the nature of living in an oppressively intense and overwhelming sensory landscape. And that really, I think, comes through well and powerfully in the best moments on this record, which are Tower of Glory, City of Shame, Mercurius, Gilded, the closer, Maximalist Scream as well, which is just a great way of describing Imperial Triumphant in 2 words. That is the real effect and intensity and vibe that comes through here. It's also, as we've alluded to, a very collaborative record. Like there is 1 or 2 collaborators at least on just about every song on this record. Of course, you have Kenny G and Max Gorlick coming in on Curious Gilded, but you also have Snake, the frontman of Voivod, I believe is on the closing track of this album. You have Alex Skolnick, who is a legendary metal musician from bands like Attention Deficit and Legacy and Testament. You have a number of other collaborators. Colin Marston performs drums on here, one of my favorite metal musician wunderkind figures, who has been in both Gorguts and Krallice. In fact, he's a founding member of Krallice and millions of other bands as well. One of the great metal bassists that I can think of, and here he is contributing to the rhythm section as well. Other names that are relatively new to me but that I can recognize as being key figures in other bands. Yoshiko Ohara from Bloody Panda is on this record. Seven Sons. There's a lot of
Seven Sons did string arrangements on the Dillinger Escape Plans album Dissociation, which
Yes.
I think this is very analogous to in a lot of ways. I think that their previous record was sort of their One of Us is the Killer, and I think that Via Luxury here is their Dissociation, which is just, again, maximalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Seven Sons also contributed to a very great and underrated record from last year called None But a Pure Heart Can Sing, from a screamo band called So Hideous, that I recommend checking out. So this was kind of cool to see them showing up as well. Like, there's just such a sense of collaborative synergy and just exciting energy to this band, and the way that they utilize and bring in additional parties to build this unique landscape. And this just the effect of this record and the experience of it is so unique and so unlike any other band out there right now. Even among like the wild and crazy avant-garde metal bands that we've talked about that have been putting out music throughout this year and the recent years as well, Imperial Triumphant still stand out among the crowd, I think. And it's a lot to get your head around, and I wouldn't claim to have a clear, coherent, full understanding of this record just yet, or even like have worked out all of its different creases and how I feel about every song. But every time I come back to it, it is a really rich and rewarding experience that feels like it's so jam-packed with hidden details and surprising and delightful aesthetic decisions that it really feels like this band could do just about anything at this point, and I wouldn't be surprised.
I think that this is maybe the most, like, I can certainly understand why you would have that reaction to Alphaville, just because I think that is such it's an exercise in almost precision of trying to overwhelm the listener. Whereas I think this is almost operating on its own level of just kind of writhing about with reckless abandon. Some of my favorite moments on here, like Tower of Glory, City of Shame, have these absolutely hideous choral outbursts of vocals that sound so dissonant from the actual tone of the song. Like, they'll have strings and choirs and shit that are happening, and it's just like it happens at the same time, and it just kind of, it like squelches in your ear, and you're just kind of like, like, there are just parts of this record and parts of Imperial Triumphant's discography that are the most effective. They just make you kind of writhe, and like there's like a lot of like the dissonance and the horns too that are on here. It's taking this element and subgenre of black metal and just using every single possible thing that they can in order to like just make the user feel small. They're trying to make you feel oppressed and overwhelmed. Like, a lot of the lyricism on here is talking about like indulgences and just like this, like, again, this idea of, I think the title of their album, Vile Luxury, is basically just a thesis statement for their entire sort of ethos. It's not quite as conceptual or dense as Alphaville is, but I think it's going for something different. This is an album that's like stream of consciousness. It's kind of the reverse of like, this kind of feels like the Mr. Bungle self-titled, whereas that album feels a little bit more like a California. And as a result, I still think that this is like an absolutely just harrowing listen that manages to do what Imperial Triumphant have done in the past in completely different ways. There's also stuff on here like, again, Mercurius Gilded, a great track, but Death on a Highway is also one of the most harrowing sounding things here. And I just absolutely love the penultimate track on here, Bezumnaya, which is just nothing but 7.5 minutes of eerie, dark, atmospheric shit that just is so thoroughly upsetting to listen to. Like, they've like tampered with sounds like this, especially on stuff like Abyssal Gods. And I was really worried that that aspect of their sound, that sort of almost like dark ambient quality, would kind of go away. But here it's brought back in full force, and it still sounds aggressive and oppressive, but it still manages to give you a little bit of space while still not letting you breathe. And then it lets the final track, Maximalist Scream, come in and just fucking just cudgel you. God, what a fucking closer this has. I would say if this album has anything on Alphaville, I would say that Maximalist Scream is the sort of definitive closing track for this band in their discography thus far. I didn't think that they would be able to push the envelope of what they were doing any more than this. I kind of considered them to be a sort of limited band, but when I listened to their entirety of their work and their EPs and stuff, it just this band has such an open possibility for what this avenue, this unique avenue of music can even do. A lot of the ways they kind of remind me of Zealand Ardor in many respects, and just how limitless their sound feels like it could be. And I really feel like they're continuing to push the envelope just means that fans, listeners, we have a lot of good shit to look forward to. So I'm really could not be more pleased with this. Honestly, this is one of the standout metal releases of the year. Brett, you're here as our guest this week. I want to know, I don't even know if you have a history with this band. If you didn't, this must have been a hell of a ride to experience unprompted.
Well, I've been fairly new to metal since since getting into it like this year, and like a little bit of last year with like Panopticon's album. But death metal I'm very new to. I've only heard stuff by Death, which is, the place where you should start with listening to death metal. It's pretty much the gold standard. And as you said, jumping into the deep end, it can be intimidating at first, but honestly, I get kind of excited by the challenge of that. And, kind of jumping into this, I didn't really know anything about this band. I just know that this was a really highly rated album. And I was honestly really taken aback at first. I didn't really know what to think about it. Just because, obviously it's dissonant death metal. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be dissonant. It's going to be really hard to understand at first, especially for, someone like me who music like this is a little bit hard to talk about. But after listening to this thing about maybe 4 or 5 times, I kind of get more of an idea every time I listen back to it, because on first listen, this thing just kind of whizzes by you, and you don't really get a sense for all the technical things that this band is trying to do. I really like the incorporation of how they put jazz into some of these songs here, like on the opening song Chum Change, how the guitar solo near the end of it kind of has the inflection of a jazz guitar solo, how it kind of stops and starts and then it just goes on for a little bit more. So I really like that. And also kind of diving into the lyrics, I never really dove into lyrics when I listened to Death's music. I was really just there just for the compositions, but diving in, I really got a good sense of this band's kind of idea with this album, this, how on the first track they're talking about how people are gasping for culture. It's the idea that this is a dystopia, like a zombie land where people are if they say begging for autonomy, that kind of a thing. It's a very sharply written statement, I would say. And everything is just fucking it's chugging. The drums are really jazzy. The bass riff is really clean and crisp. That's one thing that I love about this album, is just how evenly mixed, and each instrument just sounds really clear. It's excellently produced. The next song, Metro Vertigo, one of my favorites on here. I believe the vocalist from the last track is also on this track as well.
I think that most of the lead vocals are frontman Zachary Ezrin, who, shout out, by the way, incredible performer who really pushes his voice to some absolutely just disturbing places.
Yeah, this song, I was just listening to it, and the first time listening to it, when it gets to the part where it just gets real quiet, and it just gets real silent. And then all of a sudden you just hear the most just disgusting, like just hideous growl that you've ever heard. It's like one of the best moments I've heard in metal this year. Tower of Glory I love too. The opening rips where it's just like they're just bending the shit out of their guitars, just trying to make this like this almost kind of like race car sound, like it's like these are like
They
race
sound like
cars
engines,
driving through
yeah.
hell or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like how it kind of opens too. I was kind of found really interesting. It's kind of like a weird like fairy tale string section, like kind of like you're watching The Wizard of Oz or something like that. But yeah, another great track. And I mean, obviously, I mean, you guys have said really all that is to be said about the track with Kenny G. I mean, it's Kenny fucking G. The way that him and his son kind of dual solo in the song, I think is really cool. I wish they would actually do more stuff like that, or I wish I would hear more stuff like that in metal. You know, like instruments that like that kind of like interplaying with solos or even like melodic ideas. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, the rest of this album is just absolutely fantastic. You know, the way that it ends too with the last track, I really enjoyed how the two vocalists are kind of switching off and like trading off between like who can do the most, you know, disgusting scream. You know, it's like the world's best screaming match that I've heard in music. Yeah, overall this was absolutely fantastic. I was really really impressed by this band, and I'm really excited to also get more into their stuff too, because listening to this makes like the Dillinger Escape Plan sounds like Pink Floyd to me.
Yeah,
so I want to see more.
My only concern with us getting you into metal with these like super extreme bands is that so much of like the classic stuff is going to start sounding like really pedestrian to you, and you're going to be like, this is not all that interesting. Where's the fucking 16 time signatures within 16 bars? Like, what happened to the fucking, you know, distorted saxophones? This is
that an even
record
number in my time signature? Get the fuck out of here.
I'll co-sign what you said about Maximus Scream as well. Like, shout out to Snake from Voivod, whose vocals on that song are just like unbelievable. And you're right, there is this sense of like dueling momentum. I know Jake and I weren't like super big fans of the new Voivod record from this year, but just listening to him on this song made me want to go back and listen to it again, like, or even just listen to some of their classic records, because they're a great band too. And yeah, there's just no shortage of surprises and moments on this record where you get a real appreciation for how collaborative metal actually is. Like, one of the sort of unsaid truths about like genre distinctions and stuff, for as nebulous as they are, is that like jazz and metal have a lot in common in terms of how music is approached, in terms of like how aesthetic and what is valued in the construction of that music and in the way that it's executed. Like technical precision and acumen and like individual performances are, compared to say standard rock music, are so much more emphasized and so much more individualized in jazz and in metal. And so this is a great showcase for the unity of those two forms, and how essentially the DNA that's there is really not all that dissimilar. And the other thing I'll say as well is, like, this is me getting a little bit intellectual, just fucking sue me. The decision to have Kenny G on here as well, like, I think it's more than just like, hey, that would be cool, or more than just like there's a connection there that made that possible, but also like Kenny G, this figure of like 90s smooth jazz, like this figurehead who is kind of the punching bag for the most like rote and sort of like anodyne and sort of plastic meaningless things that could ever be called jazz. Like this kind of figure who represents jazz in an era where jazz had become essentially so like gentrified and pastel and kind of colorless that it sort of represented in a lot of ways like the luxurious capitalistic excess of like, you know, bland music essentially that had no sense of like struggle or meaning or unity within it, however you feel about that whole like line of thinking. And the decision to have the figurehead who represents that kind of like, you know, height of gentrified white bread anodyne bullshit lounge jazz, and have him on this record actually showing some serious chops, is, I think, in keeping with the kind of commentary that and the kind of like tongue-in-cheek sense of humor that Imperial Triumphant have as well. they're kind of like recontextualizing this figure who essentially musically represents everything they're kind of railing against. And they are repositioning and remolding him in their own image. And I think that is kind of super sick on a conceptual level, like regardless of how you think about how it sounds as well. And it does sound awesome. So yeah, I think this is a band that have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. They have ambitious ideas for their particular brand of dissonant death metal and jazz. And they are doing really exciting things with it, working at the peak of their powers, making the best music of their career. So absolutely don't miss this. It is an essential 2022 listen, and definitely one that is up in the upper echelon of the albums I've heard from this year so far. Let's go into our favorite tracks and ratings for Spirit of Ecstasy. Jake, why don't you go first?
My 3 favorite tracks, I'm going to go with the 3-track run of Tower of Glory, City of Shame, Mercurius Gilded, and Death on a Highway. 3 of the best songs this band has made thus far. Honestly, I think my least favorite song on here is probably just Chump Change, just because it's the most rudimentary by comparison, but it still whips fucking ass. This is a 9 out of 10 for me. I would very, very hesitantly, just because I do love Abyssal Gods, say that this is probably the 2nd best album from this band so far. So rejoice, metal lovers.
All right. My favorite 3 tracks are, definitely Metro Vertigo, Tower of Glory, and Mercurius Gilded. My least favorite track, I'm not really sure. Maybe In the Pleasure of Their Company, but nothing really stands out to me as lesser. I actually will co-sign your statement, Jake, about Bezum Naya being like absolutely key to the flow of this record. Like it's a nice reprieve while also being like crushingly oppressive in its own right. And it really, like, this whole thing has a real compositional sweep to it that moments like that are really important for. And I am going to give this album a thoroughly emphatic 8 out of 10.
My 3 favorites are definitely Metro Vertigo, Mercurius Gilded, and I'll also go Tower of Glory, City of Shame. And I will give this a very, very strong 9 out of 10.
Awesome. Which gives us an average overall of 8.7 for Imperial Triumphant's Spirit of Ecstasy. All right, let's move into our second review of the day, which is, of course, the new album from Joey Badass, or Joey Badass, 2000. Joey Badass, legendary, I think New York-based rapper, I want to say.
Yes, New York-based.
And definitely an artist who came up around the turn of the 2010s with 2012's incredibly lauded and celebrated mixtape 1999. Then embarked on a modest but quite creatively successful and fulfilling career as a solo artist, making records such as Before the Dollars.
It's Before the Money.
I realized that as soon as I said it, and I'm just like, why did I say Before the Dollars? Anyway, and All American Bada Dollars. No, just kidding. That was just leaning into it. Anyway, yeah, so an artist who has developed a certain level of underground love, also critical success and appeal, and hasn't actually put out a record in, I want to say, it was 5 years ago that All American Badass came out, I think.
Yep.
And so he's kind of been on hiatus a bit, and this is something he does address on the new record. And it's quite notable that he comes back with this new record 2000, because it is essentially a spiritual successor to the mixtape that put him on the map. It is coming out basically 10 years, I think, even to the month that 1999 was released. And it very much represents a kind of like, well, 1999 was kind of a coming of age musical expression, and 2000 is similarly kind of like an assessment of where Joey is at, what is driving him nowadays, and the different ways in which he sees himself as a creative figure, like the different things he sees himself as capable of, the sort of artist he envisions himself being, the kind of chameleonic style he wants to be able to master, essentially. I mean, he leads off this record by saying that, like, the 3 greatest lyricists in the game are Kendrick, Cole, and himself. So he's certainly got this certain level of confidence, let's say. That's, not a strange thing for a rapper to have, but he really just leans into this sense of like really feeling himself and really having this sense that he is someone with something important to say. And I will say, I revisited All American Badass, which is still a really, really good record. And I listened to, for the first time, 1999 this week, which is, I think, one of the best mixtapes ever released.
Yes,
like
you are correct.
This record feels like instantly iconic as soon as I put it on. Obviously, I was familiar with Survival Tactics, which is the biggest song on that record, collaboration with the late, great Capital Steez, who himself put out a mixtape in 2012 that I listened to called American Corruption, which is a stellar mixtape in its own right, and of course, tragically passed away that same year before he could really release anything else. And I was always a little bit more familiar with Capital Steez than Joey Badass himself, even though I knew that Joey was essentially like a mentor figure who in large part was responsible for the traction that Steez was gaining at that time. But I'd never listened to 1999 in full until this week. And that mixtape is astonishing. Like, it just, from front to back, it's just fire. Like, Survival Tactics is the song, of course, because it's one of the best hip hop songs of the 2010s. But there are so many great tracks on that record. Waves, Illuminati, Hard Knock as well. Hard Knock is so fucking good. Like, I just blew my mind how much I love that song.
Illuminati, Survival Tactics, any song really off the mixtape.
World Domination, Daily Routine, fucking shit, man.
Waves too, Waves, especially the single version of that song, particularly because it has some different instrumentation they put in there. It's almost like a jazz song that he's singing there with a live band. But
yeah,
that was the song that I listened to in high school. He's one of my favorite rappers that I've listened to.
Yeah,
he was one of the first that got me into rap, actually.
And that's awesome. So that's one of the reasons why, actually, especially when I found out that Morgan couldn't make it this week, I really wanted to have you on, Brett, because I know you have a little bit more history with Joey than we do. And so I feel like you may be particularly well equipped to talk about your feelings going into this record and how you think this holds up, particularly as a sort of spiritual successor to 1999. And in terms of Joey being away for a certain amount of time and coming back now, like, how are your feelings on him? How are your feelings on him at the moment? And what do you think are the main sort of takeaways or things to note about this new record?
Joey Badass, I've had a long relationship with him. I've been into him probably around as long as he's been around, really. I got into him in 2012, right as I was a freshman in high school. That was about the time that I got into rap. He was one of the first rappers that I heard about, and it was around the same time that 1999 got released. As I said before, Waves was a single that he put out, I believe, before the album came out, or I believe it just wasn't available to be found on iTunes or Spotify at that time. So you could only get Waves as a single in order to really get a sense for him. And that was really all I needed, because it's such a good song. He actually wrote that song at 16 years old when he was in his mom's room. So just from that, you can kind of tell that from a young age, he is a very gifted rapper. 1999, as you've said, it's one of the greatest mixtapes to ever be released in the 2010s. And that's not hyperbole, it's just a fact. It really just has the feeling of just nostalgia. It just feels like you're back in high school, and it just feels like you're just, like with your friends, you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life. You have ambitions, you want to, be the greatest. That's what he talks about a lot with his friends. He was part of a rap collective, or I believe still is, called Pro Era. So they were around right as Joey released the mixtape, and on 1999, they're scattered all over the place. Of course, the most notable being Capital Steez, rest in peace to him. Of course, you have also other notable rappers and producers who do both. You have people like Kirk Knight, you have Chuck Strangers, Powers Pleasant, and you have there's multiple members of the group. I believe there's like 10 or 12 members of the group altogether. But yeah, that mixtape laid the groundwork for his career. He also came out with another mixtape after that called Summer Nights, which I also highly recommend. 95 Till Infinity is still one of his best songs. That was released in 2013, I believe. And yeah, ever since after he released Before the Money, I've really just been excited with everything that he does. You know, his breakout album really set the scene for him to be a famous rapper. He had a lot of success off of that. Paper Trails was had some decent radio play. He also had other songs like Christ Conscious and I believe the song's Big Dusty. That was another one of my favorite songs on there too. All American Badass, his last album before this, I also enjoyed a lot. Took a little bit more of a political approach, which I appreciated from him because I always enjoy what he has to say politically. I think he has a sharp pen. He's always been very thoughtful, always been a very personal rapper too. I always like when he talks about stuff like what happens with his family, with his friends. And that's something that he talks about on this album too. In preparation for this album and with a lot of albums actually from this year, I avoided listening to the singles just to really get a deep dive and then just really fully immerse myself in the album to see how I would enjoy it. Overall, I would say that I do come away fairly positively from this album. I do have some kind of mixed opinions about certain stuff. I do think that the album starts actually very well. I think the intro track is very good. I think it kind of plays out like a movie scene. You know, like him and Diddy are sitting at a table. They're kind of shooting the shit. They're just like saying like, "Hey man, like I'm doing this. You know, I'm doing this with my career. Here's where I came from. This is what I want to do now." It's kind of like as you said, it's a callback to 1999. You know, he's calling back to where he was and now how he's making all this money as a rapper. And it's a really cool spotlight on his moment right now in rap. And I think it's a really good way to introduce the album.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the record starts out really, really strongly as well. I was actually surprised at how much I was immediately able to sort of get on board and vibe with this. I feel a bit weird about being so surprised because I do like Joey's previous work, but I was a bit concerned going into this, especially with the idea of it having to live up to the expectations of such a monumental mixtape, as well as attempting to kind of be a sequel of sorts. And I think that while I understand the sense in which it's a thematic sequel, it really does feel like Joey at a very different stage of his life doing a fairly different thing. So I can see some connective tissue, but it very much does feel like its own thing. Joey is also cognizant of the time that he's been away and the need to kind of reassert himself with something that feels urgent, with something that feels impactful. I think one of the faults of this record can be that Joey is maybe so conscious of that fact that he's been away for a while and that the game moves incredibly quickly in the world of hip hop, that he maybe needs to reassert his strengths and perhaps even try to exert new strengths to make sure that people really know that, he's one of the GOATs, that he's one of the best in the game. And at times it can feel like he's so intent on doing this that he can kind of sometimes stretch himself a little bit thin, kind of sometimes do things that don't represent most of his strengths. But I will say, and we'll obviously talk about the elephant in the room in that regard in a minute, but I will say that for the most part, I really enjoyed this as a holistic record listening experience. Yes, it has some regretful moments. It is definitely has like a great start and a great finish. And maybe the middle of it is a little bit less consistent, but still I was thinking to myself listening yesterday and today, like, there's a lot more on here that I really enjoy than the stuff that I'm a little bit more reticent towards. Like, not only is the first track great, I think that the beats and sounds are just kind of luxurious, sort of jazzy, summery feel of songs like Make Me Feel and Where I Belong, and the gloriously fun brand new 911, which is, of course, features a collab with Westside Gunn, and Westside Gunn doing his very Westside Gunn thing at the moment, and it's just glorious.
I sold crack to a pine tree.
I feel like it's been a great year for Griselda this year. Like, every member of that group has put out like really great material. Well, I suppose Westside hasn't put out anything significant this year, but he's coming off the back of wrapping up the Hitler Wears Hermes series and being in a really kind of big place creatively and culturally as well. And of course, Conway and Benny are doing the best music they've ever made at the moment. So it's really cool to see those figures popping up. And of course, Griselda being such a kind of New York staple as well of hip hop in the last, few years as well. It's cool to have that collaborative, reach over happening. And Brand New 911 is just so fun. Like, it's such a ridiculous song. Like, those ad libs, man, they're so like over the top. Like it's not new for West Side, but it's just like whoa, especially when you're in the record's kind of been super smooth up to this point, and then that just kind of bowls you over.
He just never fails. Like one thing, like I always enjoy him on a feature, but whenever it comes to a full-length project, I feel like it kind of gets a little bit old, that kind of shtick that he does. But
Right,
he's
yeah.
excellent on here. Like he just fits so perfectly, and like the beat that they chose, it's perfect for both Joey and West Side Gun too.
Yeah, his kind of charisma, it feels like it's filling a gap in the culture that, and this is not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but his particular style and his energy and his just total weirdness is like, it feels like it's filling a gap that was left when Young Thug sort of stepped out of the limelight. And of course, with the unfortunate things that have happened with him recently as well. It's great that there's figures in hip hop that are still willing to kind of step up and do that irreverent kind of transgressive shtick that he did. Not, obviously they're completely different artists in their own right, but it was something that I thought while listening to this. And like, I think that even though it is like the first 4 tracks and sort of the last 3 or 4 tracks are really where the standouts are, I actually think the midsection does have some moments I really enjoy. I think the beats and the sounds on tracks like Eulogy as a real standout as well. I actually think that, so there are the weakest moments of this record, again, big elephant in the room we'll get into in a second, are the moments where I think Joey tries to do a little bit more of a pop rap thing, tries to talk a little bit more about women, tries to talk a little bit more about like him as this sort of player figure almost. And there are moments where that lighter tone does work. Like, I'm actually a pretty big fan of the song Cruise Control. I think it's really vibey and chill, and I really enjoy the instrumental. And I think that that is an aspect of Joey's diversity that fits him reasonably well. Then, however, we also have to talk about Welcome Back, which is like a premier example of like a just incredibly terrible song on an album that otherwise is like, the quality level is so high that it's like leaps out at you. It's like
in the year of our Lord, in 2022, we are still trying to make Chris Brown a thing. I don't get this, man. Like, first of all, the way that his vocals are mixed is just fucking atrocious. This is the worst auto-tune that I've ever heard on a song in my life. That's, I mean, I'm not even joking. This is a terribly mixed song for him. And also the hook that he chooses is questionable. Isn't even the right word. It's just, call the police, please.
Here's my thing. Right. So the fuck jam sort of my dick is huge and I'm gonna fuck the shit out of you type of hip hop song is an institution, right? Like, it's a, as far back as hip hop has existed, there has been this type of song. Like, it's a logical extension of the kind of like, posturing and puffed up sort of personalities of hip hop that we all sort of love, and that makes it such a charismatic form of expression. Yet for me, just about every time, with a very few exceptions throughout history, but just about every time that a rapper tries to do this kind of song where it is all about how great they are at having sex, it is the least attractive and most kind of cringe-worthy shit. Like, these are automatic skips on just about any hip-hop record when a rapper tries to do this sort of thing. It's like, it is the most tone-deaf sort of song that you could write in terms of like, how is this going to sound? Like, you just sound like really skeevy and unattractive and just kind of off-putting. And it's super funny to get Chris Brown on it because he's kind of like, that's his whole shtick is sex pest, essentially. And like, it's almost like you're leaning into all of the pitfalls of this type of song and just making it as poor in its execution as possible. Like, not only do you get Chris Brown on here, but getting him on here to drop lines like, I'm gripping on your body and bending it out of shape, considering some of the shit that he has done, it's like, read the room, dude. Like, it's galling, actually, is what it is. And it's just, every bit of it is just skin crawling. Also, like, I can kind of get on board with this kind of song if the artist leans into the silliness of it, instead of just like kind of taking themselves deadly seriously as this like Casanova figure. But but it never works if they're doing that. If they're doing that kind of like being deadly serious about it, even though Joey does have some lines that I think are unintentionally quite funny. Like she says she want to suck me like oxtail right off the bone, shorty, and it's honor for cocktail. Like, that is the most just disgusting euphemism for getting head that I've heard on a record in a while. Like, just, you do not want to evoke food or like animal remains when you're talking about, you know, getting sloppy toppy ever. It's just never going to be a good idea.
Also on the chorus, where I want an answer. I want an answer, Joey Badass. What do you mean by let that wind get in that pocket? What does that mean? I'm so confused.
It's so just yucky. Like, when he says as well, like, she suck it and lick it right, I eat it like I got a big appetite. Cool. Then beat it like she the next fella's wife. Like, come on, dude. Like, what are you doing, man?
I just don't know. I just don't understand why he would choose to make a song like this, considering the music that he's made in the past. I don't understand why he would go in this direction. And not that there's anything bad with this type of song. You know, there's just a difference between, you know, this and, you know, Blow the Whistle by Too Short. You know,
it's a fundamental misjudgment of his strengths. And I can only say, thank God that it's a relative outlier on the record. I will say it does, you know, you have Show Me after it, which is kind of in a similar vein. Like, it's another sort of fuck song. It's less unbearable, but it's still like, I don't get anything out of this. It's kind of cringeworthy, and it's too much. Like, I don't buy into this at all. You can't sell this vision of you as this kind of like figure. And also, just can't spell Us Without Trust as the fucking most high school fucking ninth grade bullshit bar that I ever heard. It's so funny and stupid.
Is Troy Bolton dropping bars here?
Put the lust aside. There's some things we got to discuss. So close your legs for a bit, baby. Let's open up. That's the most Drake shit I've ever heard that isn't being said by Drake.
Oh my God. And the fact that this is supposed to be a serious song, like he's actually supposed to be like endearing and like trying to be like more communicative of him. Maybe a little bit too much in that case, but you know.
Yeah, look. So yeah, those are misjudgments. The record does like eventually come back a little bit to earth, and it finishes really strongly. The last 3 songs I think are great.
Yes.
You know, my feelings on XXX Tentacion aside, I do think that Head High is a really moving tribute to having a friend that you share a connection with in terms of your passion, that, you know, saw you for who you were and understood who you were, and then losing them, it's tough, you know. And I don't want to politicize it at all, because it is just a really moving song about losing someone who means a lot to you. And then you get a similar mode with Survivor's Guilt, which I think is, honestly, I mean, the title is deliberately making you think about survival tactics, which of course was the biggest, most momentous collab between Joey and Steez. And this is, of course, a tribute to Steez. Again, 10 years on, it is the moment where the record hits the most home in terms of like looking back to 1999. I think this is the best song Joey's made since Survival Tactics. The music, the beat here is just gorgeous and really bluesy and sad and just melancholy, and it really is so tasteful and well realized as well. Opening with that sample of Steez as well, talking about like the alienation that he feels, like the sense of distance and loneliness. in the world that he exists. Like, it is gut-wrenching, dude. It's so fucking sad. And Joey's lines here as well, like, you can tell this has come straight from the heart. Like, this is stuff that, it's therapeutic shit, man. It's so good. He's absolutely at his strongest here, really getting in touch with his emotions as well. It makes a great contrast, like the earnestness and emotion here makes a great contrast again to a weaker moment like Show Me, where he's trying to be like all like, a thug don't cry and real homies don't lie and stuff, and that shit just feels so shallow. And maybe he's like deliberately, I guess, trying to undermine that and kind of point out the hypocrisy of that. But honestly, like, it's just, the effect is so much more real when he's just bearing it, when he's just really opening up and just really letting you know how he feels. And what he feels is important to understand, to make sure that we get less steezes happening in the future. I mean, less, great artists, just people going the way that Steez did. And and just the way he talks about how he's now able to open up about it because, the discussion around mental health and depression has changed so much, and like how positive that is, but also how much sadder it is to then think about how things couldn't be that way back in 2012 when Steve's really needed it. And he also talks, of course, the song is also about his older cousin, Junior B, who passed away as well in a car accident. And so it's really raw stuff. And it ends beautifully with a great outro from Absol, sort of talking about his first encounter with Steez and his initial impression. And, that moment where Pro Era really seemed like the future of New York hip hop, and how that, it's not necessarily that wasn't realized, but just that, shit got in the way. And yeah, it's really moving and really hard-hitting stuff, and it makes for a really powerful climax to this album.
Yeah, one thing that I think the most thing that I appreciate the most about this song, well, for one, is that just like the pure honesty that he kind of brings to this song, not only just like how he feels about Steez's passing, but about other stuff that happened too. He talks about how his Steez's family after his passing kind of accused him of like, changing as a person, and like, they had some fights in between the family, and especially as someone as Joey who loves Steez, it seemed like really heartbreaking to him, and it seems like everything now is kind of patched up from them. But the other big thing is that when Capital Steez passed away, everybody was kind of asking Joey about how Steez was, if Steez was going to release new music. Were they going to release an album? They said he was going to release an album. They people have been like berating Joey about Steez ever since he's died. And for somebody, you could easily milk that. You could easily take that with your career and use that to your advantage. You can use his name as much as you want, but for Joey, he's a smart guy. He knows when to speak his piece, and I think he did it. And I think he waited the right amount of time to actually talk about it. And the way that he did it, and the full dedication that he gave to this song, as well as his cousin's passing, I think was very emotionally moving. And I think I do agree as well. I think this is probably the best song that he's made since Survival Tactics. And the whole title itself, Survival's Guilt, how he feels guilty about him not being there for him, how he could have helped him before he ended his own life. That is something that really hits home with me. For waiting 5 years to drop this album, I think some moments I think he could have done a little bit better. I agree, songs like Show Me, and of course songs like Welcome Back. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of Cruise Control. I just think that it's kind of a throwaway for me. But I'm surprised we actually didn't talk about one of the best songs here, Where I Belong, which has one of the best beats of the year.
Great beat, great song.
Shout out to Static Selecta, who over the years Joey Bada has frequently worked with, and they have excellent chemistry. There's not a single bad song that they have together. And throughout the song or throughout the entire album, he provides the beats for some of the best songs here. This is one of them. I just love like the plinking arpeggiated melody, and the way that the vocal sample comes in, and then the way that Joey just rides the beat, and his flow is just effortless, and it's just it's one of my favorite moments in rap of the year.
Yeah, completely co-sign. And I really like the closer as well. I think that one of the best beats on the album here as well really ends the record on a definitive note. It feels like, I'm glad the record ends with this song as opposed to something like Survivor's Guilt, because it gives you a sense of like, you get to breathe a little bit after the intensity of that song. And it feels, again, like it brings the record full circle with the ditty as well. And I think the song's a real standout. Ignoring the terrible lyric about his stock being like a teenage cock, which is like, just no, don't say that. You can.
But what about the line about swimming? I think it's like swimming upstream like a hippopotamus.
That is kind of funny. I like, that's so stupid that I bend back around to kind of liking it. This is the thing about Joey as well, is that he is very talented and he's great at writing, but he occasionally will just like, and he's not the only rapper that has this problem, but occasionally he will just get like so into the way that he's rhyming and the way that he's writing that he will just like write this really stupid bar and just won't be able to like have quality control enough to leave it out. And sometimes those stupid bars are like funny in a way that just makes you laugh and think that's Joey. And then there are other moments where it's a bit more regrettable. But look, it doesn't detract that much from how great the song is. I don't think. I enjoy it as a composer a lot, and I want to see him continue to push himself a little bit more in the future, but also like keep in mind what his strengths are. And I don't want to say that artists like Joey shouldn't like, try and move outside their wheelhouse, definitely experiment and stuff, but you've got to know when something isn't for you. And welcome back. The whole that's not the avenue that Joey excels well in. And I hope that he is able to internalize that and maybe improve in that regard in the future. But he's obviously still got a lot of the talent that he's always had, and it's a record that is worth checking out, I think, even if you've never heard anything from Joey. I mean, if you've never heard anything from Joey, well, go and listen to fucking 1999, man. But like, this, I think, makes for a good chaser to that record. I've had a lot of fun playing them back to back, and I'm glad that we're able to find the time to review this year, especially in a year where there's been a lot of great hip hop that we haven't found the time to formally review. So I want to change that trend and get us reviewing more and more records like this as well. And I'm glad that we could have you on to talk about it with us, Brett, as well. Jake unfortunately not able to join us for this review. He had to dip out for work, but I think you and I had a really comprehensive chat about the record. So really, really good stuff.
One other thing, though, that I want to mention is that I wish he could have included actual members of Pro Era, because, since this is a record that's calling back to that era, I think it would have been nice to actually hear some verses from them. There is production from Kirk Knight and Truck Strangers. They provide great beats on here, but I would have loved to hear some voices from there. But overall, I think this is a decent album.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, let's go into our favorite tracks and ratings. I've got some favorite tracks and ratings from Jake here. His favorite tracks are Where I Belong, Cruise Control, and Survivor's Guild. His least favorite, of course, is Welcome Back. Is it Welcome Back or Welcome? I've already forgotten.
Welcome Back, yeah.
Welcome Back. And Jake gives it a 6 out of 10. Brett, why don't you go next?
Okay. Favorite tracks, Where I Belong, Brand New 9/11. I mean, I can't resist West Side Gun. And Survivor's Guild, of course. Least favorite track, I mean, it's unanimous here. It's Welcome Back. 100%. And overall, I'll give this a 6 out of 10.
All right. My 3 favorite tracks are Survivor's Guilt, Written in the Stars, and Where I Belong. Least favorite, Welcome Back. And I'm going to give the album a 7 out of 10. This has warmed on me with each listen and really got me into Joey's discography more recently. So it actually, and it also made me want to go back and listen to some of that real early Pro Era stuff, that Steez's mixtape and all that sort of stuff. So it's a net positive from where I'm standing, which means we get an average rating overall of 6.3 for Joey Badass's 2000. Let us know at home what you think of either of the records we've discussed today, Imperial Triumphant's Spirit of Ecstasy and Joey Badass's 2000. We want to hear from you in the comments. How do you feel these records hold up to these artists' previous work? What are your main takeaways, main thoughts? What did you think of our takes? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you stick around for Jake and I's Record Club in just a couple of days' time on Blur and Gorillaz. We're going to talk about an album from each of those bands and Damon Albarn in general. It's a really great episode that we've already recorded. And of course, Jake's Cocteau Twins breakdown later in the week as well. Going to be a really good video too. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider giving us a like and subscribing, of course, if you have not already. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can head on over to the YouTube link in the description to do just that, if you want to, of course. If you want to go above and beyond and support us even more, for just $1 a month, you can hit the join button and support us directly, become a member of the Jams and Tea family, get to recommend us records to listen to, and we will give you feedback on our thoughts, and also get your name featured in the title crawl of every video on this channel. But as always, folks, until next time, rock over London, rock on Chicago, forward, go further.